Welcome, everybody. This is Dr. Terrence Duncan, and we're going to go over the eighth of eight modules of the dissertation journey. This is the last module in the dissertation journey, and the title of this particular module is Refining the Dissertation Proposal. We're going to learn how to put everything together from modules 1 through 7. The objectives of this particular module is, as noted before, we're going to go over modules 1 through 7. We're going to establish a continuity as a scholar practitioner during the dissertation journey. And we also will be looking at how to complete the critical areas for proposal development. Some of the key points for Module 7, the last module, includes utilizing the research literature to establish a rationale towards the methodological approach. We talked about distinguishing the selection process between qualitative and quantitative methods, as well as distinguishing the difference between those two methods to designate your research design. Module 1, we went over what is a dissertation. And this is where we use the analogy of the journey. That's why it's aptly titled The Dissertation Journey. So we talked about how the journey begins, and that involved the pursuit of a dissertation resembles more than a journey. We focused in the areas of independent research and independent thinking as a hallmark of a student going through the doctoral program. And we also discussed how the chair is involved with the student where they provide the supervision during the doctoral education process. Action research, something that was discussed from module 1 all the way to module 7. What is action research? It entails the ability to produce the knowledge grounded in local realities. It brings about change. It is a primary focus, or research is a primary focus, but it also describes how the action is regulated as a byproduct of the research. So you're looking at a particular piece of research, whether it be an academic journal or some other artifact, and based on the information that you read, you were able to break that down a little bit further and using that as a byproduct of what you originally researched to help drive additional research. Also in the action research dissertation discussion, we talked about how it was becoming increasingly popular among researchers to address the community needs and specific problems. And we also equated how action research is identical to transformational change. As with everything else in life, you have to develop a strategy, and it's no much different than working on your dissertation on the dissertation journey. So some of the steps, and not to go over all of them, but some of the steps included creating a work-life balance strategy and research, write, revise, rinse, repeat. The research, write, revise, rinse, repeat. Just that process of repetition that is almost inevitable as you are working on your dissertation, and it's something that you should be comfortable and familiar with, because unfortunately for some that revise may happen a little bit longer than it may be for other students, but it really comes down to the end game, which is producing a dissertation and having the two letters in front of your name. In module 2, we covered the soft skills for a dissertation prep. And when we talked about soft skills, when you're doing actual research, that's somewhat of a hard skill. You're actually going through the process of looking at artifacts, whether it's through academic journals or through books, or maybe through different data sets or something of that nature. The soft skills is recognizing the what's inside of you, the intangible traits that's going to help you get over the finish line. Those who become more immersed with the research for topics and research strategies, they have to use the soft skills to be able to find that connection. And also by utilizing soft skills, you go beyond the scope of the assigned text. So you're actually thinking a little bit more abstract, even though that you're more likely reading more linear information. It's a skill that has to develop over time, because most master's courses do not equip students with the tools for dissertation writing. That's not saying it's not important, but you do have different levels of learning for every class that you're involved with. Even if you're a high level writer or a high level learner, you do have students that may not be as high up on the grading curve, students that may struggle with analytical ability. And so as a professor, those professors are a little bit more inclined to try to have something a little bit more down the middle. Whereas once you start working your dissertation, the critique starts to get increased, the evaluation becomes a little bit more challenging, and areas where your soft skills need to shine definitely have to start shining through in your doctoral level. You have to explore the themes. And Basically, if you want to equate it to the process of what you're doing for your dissertation, you want to engage in a qualitative approach towards understanding the themes that may have worked for previous doctoral candidates. When you do have your chair and you're interacting with your chair, or if you know somebody that's working on a dissertation or that has finished their dissertation, or somebody that's a little bit further ahead, don't be afraid to ask. Think of it as a mentoring approach. In the business world, you come in as a junior executive, and then you start working with a senior executive to really know the ropes. You might have the book knowledge, but do you actually have the practical knowledge? And one of the methods of getting a practical knowledge is to seek out where these themes exist and be able to apply it to your own program. The combination of hard and soft skills involves thinking, being analytical, your ability to plan, your ability to synthesize literature, and your demonstrated ability of time management and organizational skills. And so, even though this doesn't really go too deep onto how to conduct a particular process, this particular module, the module does help identify like you need these particular soft skills and combine it with your research ability to help create a better candidate to pursue the process. In module three, we discussed on how to develop a problem statement, and that was a one of part one of two. And what we discussed in module three was how to use action research to develop a problem statement. And if you remembered from module one, we talked about what action research is. And like I said, this is it was a common theme throughout all seven modules to date. Uh, Action research is becoming increasingly popular. So let's find out where the trends are. Let's find out what research was able to guide you to another byproduct of finding another piece of research to help develop your problem statement, or something for your methodology, or even something for your design selection. Their research Action research does produce the knowledge which is grounded in local reality. So you're looking at certain truths that's specific to a particular community or industry. And action research involves conflict where, or I'm sorry, research involving conflict where individual professional behaviors are not in sync with the spouse behaviors create action knowledge conflict. So, in order to avoid that, you need to identify the gaps and develop a study to address the gap. Depending on how robust your study is, you might have to use different methods to address different gaps. You also need to identify constraints in your research. So it's more than just saying, oh, I'm going to do a qualitative survey on staffing shortages at this particular hospital. What are the constraints in your research? What is, if you're trying to do a study such as this, keep in mind that this is in the middle of a pandemic. By the time you're listening to this, it's still during the coronavirus pandemic. Healthcare workers are doing a lot of extra work, and if you want to do a qualitative study and addressing shortages in the healthcare facilities, how easy are you going to be able to get candidates to work with you if they're actually dealing with a national emergency? Also, in module three, we talked about the challenges of a problem statement and provided four different challenges based on Jacobs 2013. And actually, that particular research article, I believe he had 10 different challenges that was listed. These were the four, what I thought were a little bit more common and something that you probably can address while you're developing your problem statement. We also discussed about creating alignment and how alignment is necessary to properly craft your problem statement. And think of the problem statement as the foundation of your house. Think about the problem statement being the engine of your car. You want to make sure that the problem statement is consistently supported throughout the dissertation, and that is based on the literature and action research. Module four, we discussed developing a problem statement part two, which was a continuation of module three. And we discussed the statements of opinions versus the problem statement. And so, statement of opinions are judgments, viewpoints. They're not as conclusive or factually based. If you look at blogs or if you look at certain editorials, those are statements of opinions. They're not actually grounded in sound research or facts. And so, one thing you have to guard against as a doctoral student is are your positions validated by research? Is it validated by the facts? Do you have something to validate your assumptions? Some of the elements of a problem statement depending on your chair, some chairs may emphasize it more than others, but some of the key areas to look at is what is the general problem. We talked about gaps earlier. What are the gaps being addressed? Now, that's actually outlines, okay, that's a sub problem within a major problem that you want to try to address while you're developing your problem statement and your dissertation. Also, within the element of a problem statement, you want to look at the nature of the research problem and its importance to business practice. How is this relevant to the current industry or practice or technique, and is it relevant enough where a study is warranted? You want to validate your assumptions, and that's where we go about the statement of opinions versus research and facts. You want to be able to get your citations from credible sources, ideally from an academic journal, because you know it has been peer reviewed and vetted. I always recommend the statistical value because that underscores the significance of the problem. So if you have like 30%, if you say something to the effect like maybe 30% of dialysis patients are African Americans, and you note that that 30% is extremely high in relation to the actual population itself, and you want to put that in there because that underscores the problem. If you just said that African Americans are going to get dialysis treatment and it costs the government money, that doesn't really state the problem clearly enough to warrant an ongoing study. Also, in this module, we talked about the why, which is the purpose statement. So the problem statement is the what, the purpose statement is the why. And so you want to kind of differentiate between the two. You can look at the problem statement as being number one, and you can look at the purpose statement as being 1A. And some of the things that you want to consider in the purpose statement is that you want to restate the intent of the study, as well as identify the target population. So in this particular module, this is the first time we actually started discussing a little bit more in depth about the scholar practitioner model. And just a brief summary from that particular module, the scholar practitioner model, or the SP model, blends the combination of theoretical research and informed knowledge with personal and professional experiences. It is a practical application of scholarly knowledge and research. And even though it is not officially known as one, it is unofficially considered a hybrid model as it addressed immediate practical problems in fields such as engineering, education, psychology, business, healthcare, etc. So if you have a doctorate of management, that is a hybrid model because it's actually a SP model because you are taking both different approaches to solve a problem in areas in management. If you are a doctor of engineering, same thing. You're solving engineering problems that's very unique to the industry, but you're using a scholarly approach to it. Module 5, we discussed about elaborating research questions. The finer approach to research. I thought this was an appropriate article to include and something that I would recommend to have for your repository. But Rattan and his colleagues had noted that the finer approach towards developing the research questions involved the following: feasibility. Is the research interesting? Is the research novel? Is the research ethical? And is the research relevant? We also discussed how to develop a research question, and some of the key areas that a research question should address includes: does it remove ambiguity from the study? And is your research question clear and focused? Can the proposed research question appear to be too narrow, or could it appear to be too broad? And how is the research question measurable and relatable to the problem in the purpose statements? You want to avoid ambiguity in research question development, and that includes avoiding poorly stated questions, noting that the scope of research is too narrow, and the differences between qualitative and quantitative methodology. Module 6, we talked about selecting the best method, and we indicated the different types of research. The more commonly used among doctoral students is the qualitative method and the quantitative method. Know the differences between the two. As the qualitative may prompt emerging questions, the quantitative methodology examines relationships between variables. You have an inductive style with qualitative, whereas quantitative is deductive. And by the end of the day, you want to make sure that you conduct action research based on sound literature review to help determine what is the best method for approaching your problem. We did touch up briefly on mixed methods. You don't really see a lot of mixed methods in a scholar practitioner model. Most of them are most of them are either qualitative, and most of them are either quantitative. But mixed methods can be viable because it does merges both methods to provide more of an optimal results. But you kind of see the mixed methods in more in the clinical studies and those in a pure scholar model of doctoral studies, such as the PhD. Reason why you don't see too much mixed methods in your as a scholar practitioner for the university that you're attending is because of the fact that it takes longer to conduct the research study, and then also it can be more expensive. So the money invested in a qualitative method to get the emerging questions to address the more relationship between the variables through a quantitative method will be way much more costlier than it would if you stuck to one or the other. And as you're developing your method selection, you want to avoid bias. And so, just as we notated the difference between qualitative and quantitative methods, you also want to notate the bias that's available under each methodology. So, under the qualitative theme, you want to verify with more data sources, and you want to assess for alternative explanations. Whereas under the quantitative method, you want to understand systematic errors in research, and you want to avoid using agree or disagree only in research questions, which is why you may see Likert scale questions 1 through 5 or 1 through 7. The last module before this module is developing a design approach. And we talked about, does it match? We talked about, again, the SP model addressing more specific needs within a specific industry. And are you developing a research and recommendations to address systemic challenges? Because different approaches bring different results, and merging different approaches may provide a more robust analysis and results. And if you can look at different constructs based on whatever method that you selected, it could provide a more intrinsic response to the specific research problem. You also have to understand that different theories have different assumptions. So a researcher may look at one particular theory, like the theory of planned behavior, and come up with different questions or different constructs to be able to understand the relationship between the variables within the theory of planned behavior. Where somebody may say, or actually for myself, I took for my dissertation, I took the technology acceptance model. I took three models from there, three of the constructs from there, and two of the constructs from the theory of planned behavior to form my methodology for my dissertation. And as you continue to write your dissertation, you want to validate your assumptions and methods, and doing so involves cross-validating your assumptions, examine the construct and qualifiers, accounting for biases, and acknowledge biases in ongoing critical reflection. The scope of the project, the dissertation is very long. It's probably one of the longest pieces of work that you have provided up to this particular point. And so you want to make sure, is everything within the scope and is it relevant? So some of the questions to consider include, how can the desired research method address gaps in the literature? And does the literature review address the above questions? And what is the desired goal of the research proposal and research design? And alignment. So you have the scope, and you also have to have the alignment piece in it as well. So are you staying within the umbrella scope of the dissertation that you're trying to achieve? And also, are you aligning the research and the literature review to be able to connect it to the problem statement throughout the entirety of your particular dissertation? In the end, you got to make a choice, which is better. You have to know the distinctions between the qualitative and quantitative methods. And even though you could consider mixed methods, you just want to know some of the time and cost concerns that may be associated with the mixed methods. You always want to try to remove bias as much as possible. Can you 100% remove bias? More than likely not. And as you see, as you continue to publish and as you continue to write and research, there's not too many things as absolutes in the research process. So you're going to have some errors. You're going to have some system errors, and you're going to also have some biases that could exist just based on how you're approaching the research. So you want to basically mitigate against that. You want to validate the reason and assumptions with the research. Does the actual method match up with the particular problem statement for which you're trying to resolve? So it's not uncommon for students to go one particular route, and mainly I've seen qualitative people being switched to quantitative, not because it's a preference of the chair, but because what the student is trying to achieve sounds more quantitative in nature versus qualitative. So I have seen it from quantitative to qualitative, but either way, you want to validate the reasons and assumptions, and also make sure that that does align with the prescribed methodology that you're trying to include in your dissertation. And that's it. So this is the last module of the 8 modules of the dissertation journey. And I hope you were able to enjoy each video lecture as well as the slides that was provided. And if you have any questions, please feel free to give me an email. And I look forward to hearing back from you, your feedback and your responses. And you have a great day.